Okay, I'm talking to Jim Loeffler. It's February 13th, 2025, about the 1996 Klezmer conference at Wesleyan. What do you remember about it? You were probably the junior member.
I'm pretty sure I was. I was I had only graduated college like 3 months, 4 months before. I was terrified and I was inspired by it. I as a aspiring academic, I was terrified because it was a gathering of the world's leading ethnomusicologists, and a field was being formed, right? A field was being born in terms of experts really coming together to discuss in this way, and with the world's leading musicians, right? Practitioners of this art. So I really felt like a double whammy of those two communities, coming together. But it was inspiring because of the, who was there, and because of the dialogue between, the artists and scholars. And it felt like an incredible model for how you do engaged research and how much scholarship depends on the exponents of tradition, and how much tradition learns from scholarship, right? So that was one of the big takeaways for me, was just this very rich, very intense dialogue.
Nice, nice. That does still, typify this particular field, all the way
Yeah,
through the current Klezmer Institute work. The musicians are researchers in this field, and researchers can often be musicians. And
yeah.
yes, and that's where ethnomusicology has come around to that. They have the feeling like, well, we were
Yeah,
doing
and
this.
that was also a big takeaway for me, as someone who had, um, followed the lead of scholars in learning from text, learn
Uh-huh.
from recordings,
Right.
um, you know, uh, um, and kind of viewing performers as and musicians as knowledgeable but kind of vessels. It was a big chiddush, right? It was a big takeaway that there were musicians were deeply informed researchers in this field, and that they had amazing amounts of knowledge in their heads, right? That might never turn into formal, writing about it, but deep analytical reflection about, genre, about sources, about context. That was it just gave me a realization how much knowledge isn't articulated, right? And so that was another reason why the conference was very exciting, because these musician scholars are being invited to kind of talk out loud about the stuff that they know and study, but just use for their craft and use for their teaching, but not thinking about it as, again, we're going to formalize this outwards as an output
Mhm.
for a
Mhm.
field to define something.
Do you remember any specifics of what people said or
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
it's kind
I,
of hard. It's almost 30 years.
yeah, yeah. I don't know what I remember about a specific moment like that. I do remember another dimension of it, which is sort of related to it, which was the really powerful exchange between, I believe, Kurt Bjorling and the clarinetist. Was it Joe Borak?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Right,
you
right.
know, who and that was very interesting because Kurt was an
Yes.
outsider, right?
Yes,
Coming
right,
into the
right.
context, and having spent immense amounts of time like reconstructing, the recorded sound base, and Joe was more like a living exponent of it. And there was an exchange in which I believe Kurt was saying something, and Joe basically went out there and said, "I don't really think you, how could someone who's not Jewish know this stuff? How could they actually, right, have authority and know this stuff?" And then he said something like, "Oh, if you're not in shul, sitting by the bima, hearing somebody, hearing the chazan, then you can't really feel it in your kishkas." That kind of shtick. And Kurt said, "Well, actually, I've gone and done that too. Like I've engaged with this tradition, this community, not just listening to old recordings." And Joe said something, I think, mildly offensive or offensive, like, no, you'll never get it. You're an outsider. Um, and it was a kind of a standoff, and it was a little shocking to me too, because I knew that all fields police themselves and all communities erect boundaries, but it seemed like this is a community that is small. This is a field that is vulnerable and still in recovery mode from war and genocide and disruption. And so we need all the help we can get, and that's not really the way the Derek be following. But then there was this turnaround moment after Kurt played at the concert
Right. Yeah.
during the conference. I think from the stage, Joe basically did a mea culpa and said, "I was wrong. I understand how much this artist understands us, and understand how much he's part of us, right?
Yes. Yes.
That was incredibly powerful, and it typified a kind of, again, this sense of coming together and
Hmm.
figuring out how knowledge is created and transmitted, and how much goes into it. I basically,
Yeah, you're right. That's one detail that most people do remember. It was very striking and in a way very positive, outcome
yeah,
in a sense that
yeah,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
well,
yeah. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it was the setting was also important, I think, because it was Wesleyan, it was this premier place for this field of ethnomusicology, of this storied history. But it also was, it wasn't your stereotypical setting. It wasn't New York City, right? It wasn't some version of these conversations have been taking place at Kles Camp, other places. But it was really different. It felt like, okay, Yiddish vernacular culture, expressive culture is entering the academy in a new way.
Hmm.
That was really powerful. I was
Oh,
somebody
good,
of the
good.
generation who, benefited from the introduction of the institutionalization of Jewish studies,
Uh-huh.
from the rise of Yiddish language instruction, from the pioneering scholarship of people like Mark Slobin, who were, training people and building the next generation. But still, there was a question about, does this stuff belong in the academy, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
Jewish studies was
Okay.
really still a field dominated by rabbinic and biblical scholarship, and it had a complex, sometimes antagonistic relationship to Jewish expressive traditions, right?
Right.
Um, and the academy as a whole also. So that was really powerful. And for
Oh,
me, as
good.
a
Oh,
young,
good.
young
Yeah.
scholar thinking about
Yeah.
planning grad school, that was very powerful because it was a space that wasn't marked as a Jewish cultural space, but it was suddenly infused with this incredible level of
Uh-huh.
energy and
Uh-huh.
intellectual inquiry, and Yiddishkeit.
Right, right. And it also ended up being a springboard for the book, American Klezmer, its roots and offshoots, because many of the papers just found their way into that volume. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah. Again, it was that was a that was a major turning point, I think, for klezmer studies, certainly, right? But also for Jewish cultural history, that it could have this multidisciplinary thread in it, that could really be foregrounding sound, and it wouldn't just be driven by, an authoritative figure in a field like historical musicology or ethnomusicology
right.
who does it, but the density of scholarship is what makes it so important.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's really you said that all very eloquently and summarized it so nicely. So thanks.
Yeah,
These are all sort of short takes, but that's really
yeah,
um, really helpful to the project.
yeah,
Uh, we'll see what happens with it there. So I'll
yeah.
stop recording.